before Jerusalem, before Rome. There was a land where the word was already written, where kings spoke the language of heaven, and the rivers of Africa carried the whispers of God. Long before the world called it Ethiopia, the ancients called it Cush, a name that echoed through the earliest pages of the Bible. A land so old, even Genesis remembers it. From the Nile to Axum, Africa was not a footnote in the divine story. It was one of its first chapters. But over time, the world forgot. The stories faded, the scrolls were buried, and Africa's sacred place in Scripture was replaced by silence. Yet the light of truth cannot stay hidden forever, because in the highlands of Ethiopia, beneath centuries of prayer and stone, there lies a Bible older than the one the world knows, a witness to a divine story that began on African soil. This is the missing chapter of the Bible, Africa's place in the story of God. For centuries, the world has read one version of the Bible, a collection of books chosen, translated and rewritten through the lens of empire. But far from the councils of Europe, in the mountains of Ethiopia, another story was being guarded, a scripture untouched by Rome's revisions, written not in Greek nor in Latin, but in Ge'ez, the sacred tongue of an African kingdom that refused to forget. Among these texts lies the Book of Enoch, a divine record that speaks of heavenly watchers, angels who walked the earth, and secrets of creation that vanished from Western Bibles. Long before Europe called it Apocrypha, Africa called it truth. These weren't just stories. They were the spiritual memory of a people who walked with God, who carried the ark, who sheltered the Holy Family when the world turned against them. When Jerusalem fell, Africa opened its arms. When manuscripts were burned, Ethiopia kept them safe. Because Africa was never outside the Bible's story. She was its keeper. Long before the cathedrals of Europe rose from stone, there were churches carved into the very heart of Africa. In Egypt, where the infant Jesus once found refuge, the early followers of the Way gathered in secret. Long before Christianity became a crown of empires, from the deserts of Alexandria, African theologians like Athanasius and Origen wrote the words that would define the faith itself. They debated, translated, and preserved truths that the Western world would later call their own. Further south, in Nubia and Axum, the gospel didn't arrive by conquest. It grew like the sun rising from African soil. The Ethiopian kings, reading the scriptures in Ge'ez, built a church that stood firm when Rome fell, and their faith endured, untouched by the wars of Europe. For nearly 2,000 years, Ethiopia remained one of the few nations on earth where Christianity lived as it was first spoken, ancient African unbroken, because Africa was never converted. Africa remembered. But then came the silence. As the world changed hands, Africa's story was rewritten by those who did not understand her light. Empires rose with swords in one hand and scriptures in the other, and the land that once guarded the word was now told it had no place in it. They erased the faces of black prophets, painted angels with pale wings, and turned the keepers of divine wisdom into footnotes of history. They forgot that Moses was taught in Africa, that Jesus sought refuge in Africa, and that the first church outside Jerusalem stood on African ground. The conquerors gave Africa a new Bible, but not the one she helped to write. For centuries, Africa's sacred story was buried under the weight of colonial faith, and the world came to believe that God's light had only shone in the West. But truth does not die. It waits, hidden in ancient tongues and mountain monasteries, in songs and stories passed through generations. And now that truth is rising again. For too long, the world saw Africa only through the scars of her suffering. But those who look deeper see something unbroken, a light that has survived empire and exile, colonization and chains, because the spirit of Africa has never needed permission to rise. Today, that light is returning, in scholars rediscovering ancient Giza scrolls, in filmmakers, teachers, and believers reclaiming Africa's voice in Scripture, in every soul that whispers, "We were never outside God's plan." From the mountains of Ethiopia, to the ruins of Nubia, to the churches of Lagos and Accra, a generation is awakening, not to rewrite the Bible, but to remember it, because the story of God was never foreign to Africa. It was born here, it lived here, and it will rise here again. This is the chapter they forgot to tell you. The Bible's missing chapter, Africa's place in the divine story. This is DarkTV Chronicles, where Africa tells its own story. Because the story of Africa is not one of chains, but of crowns. If you believe the world deserves to hear Africa's truth, like, share, and subscribe.